A group of liberal thinkers, bathless, unwashed thinkers, got together for a love-in near our town. There were rows and rows of hippies, some chippies and some jippies, at the day trippers, wine sippers, society spurners, card burners, liberal thinkers love-in near our town. One super hippie feller, his hair was long and yeller, and a ringlet from his left ear dangled down. Now there was a real hip chick at the day trippers, glue sniffers, society spurners, card burners, liberal thinkers, the love-in near our town. Long-haired, head-banded hippies and flower-wearing chippies, togetherness was visible all around. But I'll tell you what the worst is, there were fellas carrying purses at the day trippers, wine sippers, society spurners, card burners, liberal thinkers, the love-in near our town. All they talked of magic powers, and then ate up all the flowers, and the nightsticks came and gathered all around. The sleeping bags were spread out, but the cops said, get the lead out. At the day trippers, glue sniffers, society spurners, card burners, liberal thinkers love-in near our town. At the hip swingers, bell dingers, banana smokers, cork soakers, liberal thinkers love-in near our town.
I'm going to do one more song, let some more people show up before I start talking.
At Ashley, you can find what you love and save up to $1,000 store-wide. So it's not just Black Friday. It's the Ashley Tonight I'm Going to Sleep Like a Log, whatever that means, Black Friday event.
A hungry feeling came o'er me stealing. All the mice were squealing in my prison cell, and the old triangle went jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal. Who was bawling, get up ya bowsy and clean up yourself. And the old triangle went jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal. The lags were sleeping, Humpy Gussie was peeping, as I lay there weeping for my gal Sal. And the old triangle went jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal. Up in the female prison there are 75 women, and among them I wish I did dwell. Then the old triangle could go jingle jangle all along the banks of the Royal Canal. All along the banks of the Royal Canal.
Gotta love that song. Luke Kelly, what a singer. He left us far too soon. Anyways, my friends, how's everybody doing tonight? Can I get a confirmation in chat that you just heard my lovely singing voice coming through loud and clear? And then we're going to get on to an interesting topic. I originally planned on just doing a reaction stream, which we will get to. We're going to get back to this documentary that we were watching last week. But before I get into that, I have some kind of half-baked thoughts, but I think they're interesting, and I want to share them. I want to get them out into the internet ether, and kind of explain what is so interesting to me about the Protestant Reformation, and what I think, just in grand historical terms, what was going on in this period of European history. So, any confirmations that I'm loud and clear? Okay, here we go. Let's get into it, fellas. A real case against the Jews. This is where we begin. What is so interesting to me about the Protestant Reformation? Well, my int came from just a single passing remark in Marcus Eli Ravage's A Real Case Against the Jews. And I recorded an audio version of this that has been passed around for years. It's gone viral multiple times. Lots of people have heard this article by the Jewish intellectual Marcus Eli Ravage, where he discusses how he doesn't understand modern anti-Semites, when most anti-Semites, quote unquote, at his time were also Christian. And he makes the very angering claim. I don't know, I'm looking for a better word than angering, but the claim that makes a lot of people very upset, that Christianity itself was essentially a Jewish subversion of native European culture. But in this essay, he makes a passing remark about Protestantism. He says here, I'll just read the whole paragraph. This was the beginning of our dominance in your world, but it was only a beginning. Here, referring to Catholicism and Christian Rome. From this time forth, your history is little more than a struggle for mastery between your own old pagan spirit and our Jewish spirit. Half your wars, great and little, are religious wars, fought over the interpretation of one thing or another in our teachings. You no sooner broke free from your primitive religious simplicity and attempted the practice of the pagan Roman learning than Luther, armed with our Gospels, arose to down you and re-enthrone our heritage. Take the three principal revolutions in modern times, the French, the American, and the Russian. What are they but the triumph of the Jewish idea of social, political, and economic justice? So, Eli Ravage seems to believe that the Protestant Reformation, beginning with Martin Luther, was essentially a re-enthronement of Jewish hegemony over Europe. And I really started to wonder what could that mean? What was actually going on here? And the more I thought about it, the more it began to become clear to me, or at least these ideas began to percolate up, that the era of the Protestant Reformation, and by the way, I'm going to try to support this with a few facts and pieces of evidence, but just to explain to you my overall thesis here. The Protestant Reformation, if viewed from a Machiavellian perspective, from the older of feudal and Catholic Europe into new, more subtle forms of like a Foucauldian biopower reformation, where the state and the elites began to focus on shaping and managing the lives of the individuals in their state, and not just exerting coercive power from a distance, which is necessarily limited. There's the amount of power that you can actually exert on, for example, a peasant population in a purely coercive manner is necessarily limited. It doesn't win over the hearts and minds of the peasants, of the common folk. So they were shifting from this purely coercive regime or purely coercive system of power to a new, more modern system of fostering participation in people's own government, fostering self-regulation and internalizing discipline within the populace as a whole. And this is a shift that leads into modern forms of participatory government. So how did this happen? What do I mean here? Well, to begin with, just prior, this would be the impetus of this Reformation, just prior to the era of Reformation, you have the crisis of the late Middle Ages and the popular revolts of late medieval Europe. From 1300 to 1500, there were more peasant revolts in Europe than ever before. And it says here, for example, Germany from 1336 to 1525 witnessed no fewer than 60 instances of militant peasant unrest. Okay. The legitimacy of the Catholic Church was basically failing. Things like indulgences and these other like practices of the Catholic Church at the time were causing the average common folk to turn against them and the nobility that was protecting the authority of the church. So from the 1300s to the 1500s, there was revolt after revolt after revolt. And I think that the elite at the highest level of society at that time started to realize we cannot go on as we have for the last 500, 700, whatever, 1,000 years. We have to reform into a system where the people actually participate in government and feel like our authority is legitimate and derived from their own consent. So this is why also you see things like in the 1500s, with the rise of the printing press, you begin to see things like a widespread disclosure of what was previously trade secret knowledge that was kept very close, guarded very closely by elite guilds and elite families. De Re Metallica is one example of this, but there are numerous examples of this. I mean, there's There are, I have a list here. De Agricultura. Theophrastus's On Stones was released in the 16th century. The Book of Secrets was released in the 13th century, but with the rise of the printing press, it became more widespread. You get movements for universal education coming out at this time. So what it seems like was happening here, and the Protestantism, I think, neatly fits in with this trend. What it seems like was happening here is the elites realized that they had to bring the common folk on board with their own governance and bring them into the fold and make them feel like they are participating in their own governance. And the popular revolts were basically what scared them into realizing that this shift had to take place. They realized that if they don't do something now, if they don't change the way that they are handling these masses of people, then they're going to be overthrown, essentially. That this is like these peasant revolts were a legitimate threat to their hegemony, and that if they didn't basically step in front of this parade against their own power structures and lead it in a way that was beneficial for themselves, then they were going to lose power. And this is what it seems Marcus Eli Ravage was alluding to, is, you know, this tension between what he called pagan Roman learning and the Jewish Gospels. So, of course, you know, just to make it explicit, the way that Protestantism fits in with this quite neatly is... Hold on, I have a bunch of notes here. The way that it fits into that neatly is by encouraging the people and sort of establishing a system wherein the people were led to believe that they were overthrowing illegitimate power structures and becoming more empowered themselves. But by controlling this quote-unquote process of empowerment and directing the flow of knowledge, information, and channeling this popular dissent, they were able to like reestablish themselves as a new form of power, a new, more subtle form of power that I think can be described as, like I said, biopower or biopolitics. So I wrote here, from a Machiavellian perspective, the Protestant Reformation could be seen as a tool that helped elites manage widespread dissatisfaction and maintain control in the wake of the medieval crisis. The first way is consolidation of power through religious control. The Catholic Church had long been a powerful institution, often rivaling secular rulers in influence. However, the Church's perceived corruption indulgences, moral decay among the clergy, etc., contributed to a growing disillusionment among the masses. By breaking the church's monopoly on religious authority, the Reformation allowed local rulers and elites to gain greater control over religious practices within their territories. By secularizing religion, Protestant rulers could seize church lands and wealth and reduce the economic and political power of the clergy. The state could then assert greater control over both the spiritual and temporal aspects of life, further consolidating elite authority. It also allows these rulers to frame themselves as defenders of the true faith and align themselves with divine authority in the eyes of their subjects, which reinforced their legitimacy and helped keep potential challengers at bay. That the Reformation was advantageous to the elites at the time was through divide and conquer and order out of chaos type of, generally speaking, strategies. By promoting a splintering of religious unity, the elites could weaken potential alliances among the masses that might otherwise unite around common grievances against them. Okay? It also misdirects their grievances. Instead of attacking the power structures as a whole, now you have the masses of people squabbling over which faction of religion they're a part of. And finally, the print revolution that was going on at the same time allowed the elites who controlled the printing to disseminate propaganda and further their own political agendas, which allowed them to frame the Reformation in whatever way suited their needs. So that goes into then the widespread sort of disclosure of knowledge that happened at the same time. And finally, you end up seeing in the century that follows the rise of thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, who grew up at the end of the 1500s, and Rousseau, who was a little later on, but a little bit later on. But definitely Thomas Hobbes in the middle of the 1600s, who pioneered this theory of a social contract theory. And so that this shift in philosophy of governance and the idea that the individual should participate in their own governance and feel as though they are consenting to be ruled by this particular elite class was basically what was being developed during the Protestant Reformation, I'm arguing. Because like that, it just seems to fit so perfectly. I mean, the shift from the pure obedience of the masses to the clergy, so much so that the masses weren't even expected to know the words of the Bible. They weren't expected to read the Bible. They weren't expected to have any knowledge of their own on these issues. They were expected to go to the clergy and be, bestowed this knowledge when they asked. To, in the Protestant Reformation, the idea that they want to cultivate like a nation of priests where everybody is participating in their own, internal discipline. And that they do this by having knowledge given to them through like a rigorous process of education, a rigorous process of personal cultivation and development that is meant to sort of invest in themselves the idea that they're a part of this system. It closes the gap between the common folk and the elites and makes the common folk feel like they identify with the rules of the elites. It's a similar dichotomy between like authoritative parenting and permissive parenting, which let me just pull up a clip here because I think this applies. This is the one thing that Zizek ever said that I enjoyed.
Lost Illinois Medicaid?
Where can we find a
And
local
once I
health
finish this
plan?
clip, I'm going to check
What
the
about a
chat
plan
because I
that
haven't
covers
been
doctor
looking at the chat
visits?
at all.
Imagine you are a small girl or boy of, let's say, 8 years. It's Sunday afternoon, and your father wants you to visit your old grandmother. You, of course, detest it. She's old, senile, whatever. But then, if you have an old authoritarian father, he will tell you what? He will tell you something like, and this would be, as Alenka put it, a good thing to do. He will tell you, listen, I don't care how you feel. Just do your duty. Go to your grandmother and behave there properly. That's perfect, I claim. Because you will retain your, let's call it inner freedom. You will be furious at your father. But that's good for your long-term freedom and so on. Now, what would a monster called...
Okay, so this authoritarian, what he just described, corresponds to the way that the feudal system and the Catholic Church of feudal Europe operated. Basically, I'll say it again. I'll let him say it again.
Listen, I don't care how you feel. Just do your duty. Go to your grandmother and behave there properly. That's perfect.
Okay, I don't care how you feel. I don't care what you're thinking about. I don't care what your, internal beliefs are, essentially. Just do your duty. Pay your taxes. Listen to your Lord. And that's all we expect of you, okay? You basically, you retain freedom as a peasant in this system because the elites of that age were not involved in your life, or to a great extent you had more freedom in that kind of system than what you got under the Protestant Reformation, which I think is more consistent with the permissive style of parenting that he describes in just a moment.
Because you will retain your, let's call it inner freedom, you will be furious at your father, but that's good for your long-term freedom and so on. Now, what would a monster called postmodern permissive father do? He would not give you an order, but he would have told you something like this. You only go to visit your grandmother if you really want it. Just remember how much your grandmother loves you. Now, a child is not an idiot, and he or she will know perfectly what this order means. Beneath the appearance of a free choice, it gives you a much harsher order. The order is not only you must go and visit your grandmother, but you must do it freely. You must really wish to visit your grandmother. So you see this nice example of how, and this is basically what also Alenka described as that situation, do whatever you want, etc., where the apparent freedom of choice masks a much harsher choice.
Okay, so that's the overall idea. Like I said, it's kind of half-baked at this point, but those are the ideas that are bouncing around in my mind. And I think, when you look at what happened when some of these radical Protestants actually gained power, people like John Calvin, which we talked about in the last stream, you see this level of total intrusion into the personal lives of the common people happening that was unprecedented under previous feudal regimes. It also collapses and consolidates power, whereas in the feudal Catholic model, the church was one form of authority and the Lord was a separate form of authority. And to defy your Lord was not seen as like defying the will of God in a lot of ways. I mean, I know the whole like divine right to rule is something that English kings have claimed, but I think the separation of these two institutions in feudal Europe was in a way it parallels the description that Zizek gives here of the authoritarian father, where the Lord or the secular ruler in feudal Europe didn't tell the peasants, you have to pay your taxes because it's the right thing to do. They told them, you have to pay your taxes or we're going to come and kill you, basically, or we're going to come punish you. And there was no like moral or religious undertone to it. And if there was, it was ineffective. Because as you could see here, I mean, the popular revolts of the 13 to 1500s, where there were all kinds of peasant revolts against both the church and the state. And once that shift into the Protestant Reformation happened, you begin to see, there's a good example of this. What was the guy's name? Was he a Hussite? No, I don't think so. Maybe. There was a guy, like, this was when the first real campaigns or agendas for mass education began popping up, where the state began to promote the idea of educating the masses. I knew the guy's name once. He was a religious leader. But I just can't remember all these names these days. I mean, the Protestant Reformation prompted the establishment of compulsory education for boys and girls, first in regions that are now part of Germany and later in Europe and in the United States. Martin Luther's "To the Counselors of all Towns in German Countries," 1524, called for establishing compulsory schooling so that all parishioners would be able to read the Bible by themselves. The Protestant southwest of the Holy Roman Empire soon followed. The German Duchy Württemberg established a compulsory education system for boys. In 1592, the German Duchy Palatine Zweibrücken became the first territory in the world with compulsory education for girls and boys, followed in 1598 by Strasbourg, then a free city of the Holy Roman Empire and now part of France. Then you get it in Scotland, which was also a haven of Protestantism. So this corresponds with my overall thesis here. This was a shift from pure coercive power to biopower. this was really the beginning of this change in political philosophy. So yeah. I didn't plan on doing this whole spiel before, like, about an hour ago. I started opening up tabs to tell you about these ideas, but what I really planned on doing with this stream was... Oh yeah, then I was thinking about the Black Death too, and why that happened around this time. And why... Because, you know, the you-know-whos have been... They were accused of spreading the Black Plague. And why would they have done that at this particular moment? I don't know. I mean, to speculate, to put this into the speculation, to try to account for this in the theory, would require incredible, like, centuries-long vision of a plan. And I don't know if I'm willing to ascribe that to the Jews of the 1300s, but it could be that they saw these peasant revolts happening, and their first reaction was to just thin the herd, to reduce the numbers of the peasants that were revolting. And then they realized, you know, once this mass die-off happened and the revolts just kept happening, that that they had to switch things up, that something had to change. They had to bring the common masses on board with the program. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that. That's way too... That's too speculative even for me. But let's see. How's everybody doing in the chat tonight? $33 watching now. That's very Freemasonic. Now it's 36. Let's go. All right. Well, if there aren't any like specific questions, then let's just get into this documentary. I gotta take this sweater off. It's kind of warm. Let's get into the documentary. I'm gonna start it, and give commentary as we go.
Seeing this, the Protestants elect Condé as their leader, with Coligny as calm the
Stuff the bag with cash. This is the real robbery, and learn from the master.
situation, but her pleas fall on deaf ears. Several massacres of Protestants occur throughout France, and this only escalates the situation further. Realizing that war is inevitable, Condé races to Fontainebleau to secure the king. However, the Catholics get there first, and carry away the young king and his court to Paris. Seeing this, the Protestants elect Condé as their leader, with Coligny as his deputy. The Huguenots arm themselves and repel to Orléans, the largest city of the Loire Valley, and begin to provision themselves for a long war. Thus begins the First French War of Religion.
This is exactly where we left off last time. So if you're interested in the first 16 minutes of this documentary, go watch my previous stream. But this is the exact moment that we stopped at last time.
It's April 1562. The whole of France is up in arms. After the massacre at Vassy and the seizure of the king and his court by the Guise, war seems inevitable. Condé occupies Orléans, as countless towns and cities also fall to the Protestants. In Rouen, Le Havre, Tours and Lyon, Protestant fifth columnists overpower the Catholics. Condé is elected supreme commander and protector of the Huguenot cause. Using his strong position in the Loire Valley, he hopes to isolate the Protestant heartland in the southwest from staunchly Catholic Paris and the northeast. Paris is also cut off from the sea, as the Protestants in Rouen control the Seine. However, in Guyenne and Burgundy, the Catholics manage to retain control. This way, the Protestant enclaves themselves are separated from one another. This is the difficult strategic situation in France in the spring of 1562. Mobilization soon begins in earnest. As this is a civil war, both armies draw from the pre-existing units and resources of the realm. The French military at this time is second to none, being the result of 60 years of almost continuous warfare. A series of victories and defeats honed its skills to the maximum. As most armies of Western Europe, the French military is also based on combined arms formations, a close cooperation of pike and shot, cavalry and artillery. Its main striking force is represented by the gendarmes. The gendarmes are armoured head to toe in state-of-the-art plate armour. The horses of those fighting in the front ranks are also encased in armour. Most of the gendarmes are members of the nobility, trained from childhood to ride horses and charge with a lance. They are the oldest and proudest class of the professional military.
This seems like a sort of secondary effect of these wars is killing off members of the old nobility. A lot of members of the nobility, like the old school local lords and nobles, died in these wars because they were the warriors that were on the front lines. I mean, the average farmer, they fought in these wars, but the guys that were mounted in these crazy get-ups of armor, and the guys who had access to the like these early muskets that they had, and just all the provisions that were available to them. I mean, these were the guys that I think died in the greatest numbers
during the darkest days of the 100 Years' War. In peacetime, there are around 7,000 gendarmes, formed into lances comprising of 2 to 3 men-at-arms, who are supported by bussiers. They are complemented, and in some cases supplanted, by the newest branch of the cavalry, the reiters. The reiters are mostly from Germany, and are the result of the recent advances in technology. With the advent of the wheel.
And this is another thing that I've thought about too, with like the disclosure of knowledge, things like De Re Metallica and these other technical manuals that were being released at the time. I think the sheer quantity of goods and provisions that needed to be made required a greater number of people being trusted with this knowledge. So they kind of had to have more people participating in the system than ever to be able to produce the quantity of goods that was required to provision these armies. So that's just sort of like a technical limitation that was being overcome through the disclosure of secret knowledge.
The lock and the snap lock, firearms have gotten more compact, allowing their use from horseback. Instead of a lance, the reiters charge in with a pair of pistols and fire them from close range, making these compact weapons as effective as a full-size musket. Unlike the gendarmes, the reiters wear cheaper, mass-produced 3/4 armor, allowing them more tactical flexibility, but also a reasonable staying power. Cavalry makes up a fifth to a third of contemporary French armies. Even though cavalry is the main striking force, ever since the pike and shot revolution of the early 16th century, infantry has become the backbone of the army. The infantry is made up of 3 contingents. The most prominent of these are the Swiss. The Swiss have been incorporated into French armies even before the Italian Wars, and have traditionally formed the core of the infantry. They are lightly armoured and fight in a tight formation with a 6-metre long pike and a longsword. They are equally good in defence and offence, and are renowned for their resilience and bravery. The Swiss are somewhat handicapped by a reluctance to adopt firearms, these soldiers only making up a tenth of their formations. The Swiss are complemented by Landsknechts, German soldiers who are originally modelled on the Swiss. The Landsknechts are known for their colourful dress and flexibility on the battlefield. Like the Swiss, they fight in a tight formation with a long pike and a sword.
Giving Tuesday is a global
So
effort
many
that
ads
encourages
on these
people.
videos these days.
However, unlike the Swiss, they have a sizable contingent of musketeers and arquebusiers within their ranks. Landsknechts are inferior in courage and unit cohesion when compared to the Swiss. However, they are able to mitigate this by a clever combination of pikes and firearms. Additionally to these foreign troops, there's also a contingent of French infantry. The first of these formations was established by Francis I in the 1530s, who modelled them on the Landsknechts. Similarly to the Landsknechts, they fight in tight formations with an even higher ratio of muskets to pikes. As far as discipline and effectiveness are concerned, these can vary.
Look at the face of Francis I. I want to find a different picture of him. Dude. That is a schnoz and a half if I've ever seen one. Oh my God. Look at his dad. Holy. Look at the face. Look at that guy's face. My goodness. I always like to just briefly browse their genealogy. But yeah, these guys had some pretty good noses on them. Anyway, let's continue. I had nothing else to say other than he had a massive nose.
To a large degree. Veteran regiments can be as good as the Landsknechts, while newly established ones a little better than city militias. Additionally to these two arms, there is also the world-class French artillery. The French have been among the first to establish a professional corps of artillery. Their guns are manned by full-time soldiers, and have proven decisive not only in sieges, but also in fully fledged battles like at Ravenna. Thus, the quality and availability of soldiers is no issue for either side. The logistics of gathering up and paying the armies, however, proves to be far more challenging. Most active duty forces are concentrated on the border regions of France, protecting the country from the Habsburg lands that surround it. Mustering all these soldiers to where they're needed will take months. Getting the indispensable Swiss and German contingents will take even longer. Moving the artillery proves to be the most daunting task, as thousands of teamsters and pioneers need to be hired to shift the guns, powder and shot.
So much money to be made in these kinds of wars. I've said it before and I'll say it again, you know, like there's tons and tons of documented historical examples of the you-know-who's being 100% in charge of all the logistics that surround these kinds of wars, and the amount of money that was made in these conflicts is crazy.
And all of this has to be done on a shoestring budget, the kingdom being bankrupt since the death of King Henry. To mitigate their poverty, the royalists appeal to the bankers and merchants of Paris, as well as foreign aid from Spain and the Pope. The Protestants themselves first seize all regular incomes from the regions they control, and supplement this with the confiscation of church property, as well as generous donations from an extensive network of Calvinist congregations. French units are split down the middle. Most Protestants join the Protestant cause, while those who are Catholic, as well as a small number of Calvinists who hold the law supreme, join the royalist side. Recruitment of foreign regiments is less direct, being handled by local agents of the French crown. As most of these mercenary captains remain loyal to the king, their side has the advantage in the long run. The Protestants are more efficient in the short term, quickly amassing decisive numbers at Orléans. However, due to Condé's indecision, they squander this initial advantage, holding back for months in their defensive positions.
Okay, this really doesn't make any sense to me. So like it said here, the Protestants were able to mobilize more forces in a shorter amount of time than the Catholic establishment, because the Catholics relied so much on these foreign mercenaries that had to come all the way from Switzerland and Germany. And yet the Protestants chose, and the way that it's characterized here is, he's indecisive, he didn't know what to do. They chose to sit on their hands and wait for the Catholics to mobilize and gather their forces. Why would they do that if not to maximize the destruction that this war would cause? And in doing so, to maximize the profits and the chaos that the war would cause, which would create the best possible conditions to create lasting societal change as a whole. You know, the more destruction, the more chaos, the more rebuilding you can do after the fact, and the more you can rebuild according to the new vision that you have for the nation or for the country. So this fact in particular strikes me as suspicious, that on some level the conflict was being managed on both sides by some kind of hidden hand.
While the logistics are being sorted out, both sides engage in a savage war of vitriolic propaganda. The Protestants insist that far from being rebels, they are the true representatives of the king, only meant to rescue him from foreign usurpers, namely the Guise. Far from being intransigent, they claim to be on the right side of the religious debate, advocating for full toleration of the new faith. The Catholics, on the other hand, claim to be certain that the Protestant rebellion is solely motivated by a malicious desire of Condé and Coligny to become...
It's funny, by the way, here that the word that this channel decides to use in describing the way that the Catholics would have characterized the Protestants is calling the Protestants Marxists. Obviously, this is like tongue-in-cheek. Marxism didn't come for another few centuries, but it's an interesting sort of like, I think, instinctive recognition that in some way this falls in line with, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. This falls in with the like there's some kind of continuity there, or there's some kind of consistency between Marxism and the Protestants.
Become kings themselves. Moreover, they state that Calvinism as an ideology is inherently rebellious and anti-monarchical, as the conspiracy of Amboise clearly shows. A large portion of this propaganda is directed at the German princes, who control the recruitment of Landsknechts and writers, indispensable for both sides. In spite of the Catholics' efforts to dissuade the mostly Lutheran princes from helping the Calvinist French, both sides managed to recruit soldiers from Germany. As the propaganda and the preparation for war continue, Catherine and her centrist party make a last effort to obtain a negotiated peace, but to no avail. Saber rattling and the gears of war in motion drown out their voice. By June, large numbers of Swiss and Germans have gathered around Paris. The French cavalry and infantry have mustered, and the artillery is ready to go. Anne de Montmorency is put in overall command, with the Duke of Guise and Saint-André as his lieutenants.
So yeah, they waited months for the Catholics to get ready before attacking. What sense does that make in any sort of in any kind of like war philosophy, or you know, what would any general or commander of the ancient world have said about this type of strategy? Wait until your enemy is ready before you attack. Like, this makes no sense to me.
In July 1562, the Catholic army moves into the Loire Valley. They outnumber the Protestants almost 2-1, so the initial engagements easily go their way. By September, the cities of Tours and Bourges are taken. The war had barely started, and the Protestants are already on the back foot. But just as the Royalists are preparing to march on Orleans, two things happen. Elizabeth I, Queen of England, has finally made up her mind to answer the Protestants' cry for help, be it partly motivated by selfish interests. In October, an English contingent numbering 6,000 lands at Huguenot-controlled Le Havre. The French Protestants hand over the keys to the city that the English intend to hold as a pawn until Calais is restored to England. Perceiving this as a more urgent issue, the Royalist War Council decides to leave a sizable blocking force around Orleans and head into Normandy with the main force, to oust the English and to reduce Rouen. With no help coming from the English, Rouen is eventually captured by October and afterwards savagely sacked. Antoine de Bourbon, the King of Navarre, is mortally wounded during the siege, the first of the commanders to exit the stage. While this is going on, the Protestants again receive an uplift. Francois d'Andelot, Gaspard de Coligny's brother, returns to France with a large force of reiters and lanzknechts that he recruited in Germany.
Let's see this d'Andelot guy. I like his portrait. Is that how it was spelled? Maybe that's not how it was spelled. D'Andelot. There he is. The son of Gaspard de Coligny. He was the younger brother of Odette, cardinal. He was the brother of a cardinal is going against the Catholic Church. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that these family members had individuals on both sides of this conflict? Like, were these sibling squabbles, or were they on some level managed on both sides? That is the question. This family even went on to be the ancestors of English kings.
Catholics again have to split their forces, as Saint-André races with a blocking force to meet them. But in spite of Saint-André's efforts, d'Andelot manages to evade him, joining up with his comrades in Orleans. But even so, the Protestants are still outnumbered. The Royalists conclude that as the year is almost done, there will be no more significant action until next spring. To this end, they send part of their army home, leaving a sizable force to block the Protestants in Orleans, while the Duke of Guise remains in the north with another detachment to besiege the English. This way, the Catholics hope that the Protestants will run out of money, and their foreign mercenaries will desert them. But in December, Condé surprises everyone.
Wait, and Montmorency, we just saw his name. That's this guy's mom. How were they related? What Montmorency is this on the Catholic side? Was it this one? No, couldn't have been. Francois. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page. Eldest son of Anne de Montmorency. Yeah, so this was a conflict between like close family members. Cousins and brothers and sisters and aunts and nephews. They were on both sides of this conflict. And I mean, it's hard for me to believe that even if they had some like genuine grievances with each other, that on some level they weren't, you know, at the end of the war, they just like how you see you know, George Bush hanging out with Barack Obama or whatever, even if they're in public fighting with each other, when all is said and done, they probably go hang out at the same place and, you know, have a party at the same palace. And
he gathers his forces and in an all-or-nothing move marches on Paris. With the capital thus threatened, Guise abandons the siege of Le Havre and races back to the capital. Formerly demobilized soldiers are now called back, and citizen militias begin to fortify the city. In this desperate situation, Condé is plausibly close to taking the city. But instead of doing this, he chooses to set up camp several miles from Paris and wait.
So here we go, another example of the Protestant leader, instead of decisively ending the war, taking control of Paris, taking control of the king, and finishing things, he sits there and waits.
Seeing this indecision, Catherine of Medici sallies forth to negotiate. But this, of course, is merely a trick. 2 weeks of fruitless talks give Guise and Montmorency time to concentrate a decisive force in Paris. Soon, Condé becomes the hunted. Faced by a superior royalist force, he is now compelled to break camp and retreat. Now, the only logical thing is to move into Normandy to unite with the English. To this end, the Protestant army begins to move north, but on the 19th of December, 1562, their way is blocked by a large royalist army just south of the town of Dreux. The Catholics have around 19,000 soldiers against the Protestants' 13,000. They are stronger in infantry, but weaker in terms of cavalry.
Let me just ask you guys, are you interested in like the technical details of these battles, or should I skip over the battle sections? Because honestly, it kind of bores me. What do you guys think? Should we watch the skip it? Yeah, let's skip the battles. I don't need all these details about the battles.
Hey everyone, big heads up.
Oh, and they hit us
Rally
with an
is
ad
running a
for
sale
that.
on all their award-winning meat sticks, so you can get 30.
But their cavalry is still more or less intact. This prevents the Catholic army, who have very little cavalry left, from mounting an effective pursuit. Nonetheless, the Duke of Guise, the only Catholic commander left, does all in his power to follow up on the victory. By the beginning of February 1563, the main army is besieging Orléans. D'Andelot is left to defend the beleaguered city with a handful of infantry and citizen militias. Meanwhile, Coligny mounts a chevauchée into Normandy in the vain hope of obtaining help from the English or distracting the main Catholic force. By mid-February, the situation in Orléans is hopeless. The Catholics are preparing for a final assault that will undoubtedly carry them to victory. This is when an alleged Huguenot deserter sneaks up on the Duke of Guise, fires his pistol, and mortally wounds the last Catholic commander.
So this kind of makes me believe that Guise was an actual enemy of the Protestants, because this kind of underhanded, sneaky stratagem, an assassination, doesn't correspond with the previous the previous sort of overall attitude that the Protestant army was showing before, which was restraint, waiting for the Catholics to gather their forces. Once the Catholics seemed like they could decisively end the war, then they break out the stratagems. They break out with things like assassination to make sure that doesn't happen. Duke of Guise actually wanted to end the war. Let's see. What Duke of Guise was this? This would have been him, right? Claude. Highly effective general for the French crown. They led the Catholic party. Yeah, this must have been him, right? Oh, but this says he fell ill, so that can't be him. Which... Where did I just have... There we go. Is that him? Is that the same guy? Would it have been his son? No, that's his son, yeah. Assassination. In the fourth encounter, Guise was about to take Orléans from the Huguenot supporters of Condé when he was wounded. On the 18th of February, I don't know if you guys know the aces and eights. Aces and eights pop up a lot in these assassinations. This is like a numerical thing that conspiracy theorists like to point out. It's the dead man's hand is apparently a numerical sort of signal of death. Aces and eights, 1 and 8. So that's interesting. He was assassinated on the 18th by a Huguenot assassin and died 6 days later, bled to death by his surgeons. Wow, so his surgeons bled him to death. It was not the first plot against his life. A hunting accident. Guise had been appointed Grand Veneur of France in 1556. Sir Nicholas Throckmorton informed Elizabeth I, but the plot was divulged by one of the conspirators who lost their nerve, and his 5 co-conspirators fled. Guise's unexpected death temporarily interrupted open hostilities. In his testimony, Poltrot implicated Coligny, the French admiral, and the Protestant pastor Theodore de Bèze. Oh, look at that guy. Holy schmoly. That's fucking Rabbi Shmuley of the 1500s right there. He was a disciple of John Calvin. Lived in Geneva. Though the assassin later retracted his statement and Coligny denied responsibility, a bitter feud arose between Guise's son Henry and Coligny, which culminated in the Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre. Interesting. Look at this guy. Look at the hair on that guy. But yeah, interesting. Theodore de Bèze was implicated in this assassination because that guy looks like a straight up fucking rabbi. Carrying on.
With Guise's death, the siege stalls, and Orléans is given a reprieve. Now that almost all the major figures are out of the game, Catherine of Medici sees a chance for peace. Ignoring that the Protestants were on the brink of defeat, Catherine strives to obtain a negotiated peace. By this, she hopes to obtain a balance of power, where her party of moderates would become the kingmaker. After Condé and Montmorency are released, peace is achieved by the Edict of Amboise. The Edict of Amboise permits free worship to the nobility, all the while restricting it for commoners, who are only Huguenot congregations, and even there only in a few designated places. Church property is to be restored, and the German mercenaries are to be paid from the royal coffers. Given the outcome of the war, this settlement seems fair, but predictably none of the parties are happy with it. Resistance to the edict is initially high, with Paris and Lyon being the most reluctant. But eventually they likewise yield, as France settles into an uneasy peace.
Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. It turns out one of the fastest growing segments of people signing up for Mint are people over...
It's 1563. The vicious war that pitted Frenchmen against Frenchmen army acquitted itself well. However, with the assassination of the Duke of Guise, the Protestants snatched victory from the jaws of defeat by obtaining a negotiated peace. Catherine of Medici and her centrist party of politiques, who were the architects of this peace, now take the lead. Catherine's idea for a lasting peace is to play off one faction against the other. Until Montmorency quarrels with the Guise, and the Guise quarrel with Condé and Coligny, Catherine can rest assured and pretend to be the only adult in the room. After the German mercenaries are gotten rid of, Catherine endeavours to unite Catholic and Protestant in a common cause. In May 1563, the united French army marches against the English, who still occupy Le Havre. The English are ousted by August, and subsequently Catherine makes her next move. To cement her power, the 13-year-old Charles IX is declared an adult. This way, no one can have formal influence over the king, but Catherine can still exercise her informal motherly control. To show the provinces their power, Catherine and her son embark on a grand tour of France. The royal progress is planned to take 2 years, giving Catherine and the court ample time to hear all grievances and pacify all quarrels. Starting from Fontainebleau, the court first covers the east and southeast of the country. To her dismay, Catherine discovers that the country is still up in arms. All her divisive peace has achieved is more discontent. Catholics who feel cheated by the peace begin to arm themselves. They set up regional leagues, intended to do what an impotent government won't. In response to the Catholic leagues, the Protestants also set up their armed groups. Catherine does her best to quench the flames, but all this does is hide the problem.
At that time, look at the little bubble that they've got here. We almost won. Why did you make peace? Yeah, if I were a Catholic at the time, I'd be thinking the same exact thing. Like, what kind of subversive nonsense is this? Why would you make peace with these people that want to overthrow us when we were like right at the cusp of victory?
To arm themselves, they set up regional leagues intended to do what an impotent government won't. In response to the Catholic leagues, the Protestants also set up their armed groups. Catherine does her best to quench the flames, but all this does is hide the problem. By 1565, the royal progress reaches the southern city of Bayonne. Here, Catherine meets with the Duke of Alba, the representative of the King of Spain. The talks are tense.
And Spain at this time was very Catholic,
as there is already much friction between France and Spain. Philip II wants the French to take a much harder stance on heresy, as he fears that the rebellion from France could easily spread into the Low Countries. Alba insists that the French should immediately implement the findings of the Council of Trent and take the fight to the Protestants. Catherine insists that compromise is the best solution, and that Spain should stay out of France's business. The Duke of Alba leaves empty-handed as the court continues its progress northward. But the conference has further ramifications. To Alba's insistence, the Protestants were not invited. This spawns a series of conspiracy theories referring to what really took place at the meeting. The most radical Protestants allege that Catholic France and Catholic Spain are planning their demise. When a wave of iconoclasm breaks out in Flanders in the summer of 1566, these rumors gain even more ground.
This is the Beelden storm that he's referring to here. Yeah, 1566. So this was the great iconoclasm in the Low Countries at that time, which this event actually is what got me into looking at the French Wars of Religion, because it is, to me, it seems really clear that this event was akin to something like the Bolshevik Revolution, where it was a small group, like the total number of Protestants in this area was like less than 10%. And this was a small group that went in and basically robbed the churches of anything of value. They looted the churches like crazy in order to sort of give themselves more capital, more funding to do more, and to also just destroy things that were associated with what the Protestants considered heresy and idolatry. But what I think, the things that they were destroying were essentially like suited to Northern European tastes, which is why it's considered idolatry.
Philip II fears that his governor had lost control of the province. To rectify this, he orders the Duke of Alba to raise a large army of veterans in Italy, then take these troops north to intervene in the Low Countries. 10,000 men are gathered by 1567, to be joined by further contingents from Germany. In June, Alba begins his march. The route, later to be known as the Spanish Road, takes him through Savoy, into the county of Burgundy, through Lorraine and Luxembourg, finally arriving in Flanders. This is dangerously close to France. Catherine knows that this procession may well instigate the Protestants to rebellion. Therefore, the kingdom preemptively hires 6,000 Swiss mercenaries to guard the border. Eventually, Alba reaches the Netherlands without issue. However, the Swiss are not disbanded. Even though the crown insists that this is merely a precaution, the Protestants are convinced that this force is about to be used against them. Something must be done. To this end, the Protestants gather 1,500 horsemen in total secrecy, intended to capture the king and his court to liberate them from Catholic conspirators. Unlike at Amboise, this plot is only found out once it's already in progress. The court is at Meurs near Paris, almost completely unarmed. Catherine sends an urgent message to the Swiss to force march to Meur. The Swiss get there just in time, and the king is saved from the conspirators. The court...
This is another thing I don't understand. The Protestants were so willing to use subterfuge and stratagems like this, but they didn't early on in the war when it would have been decisive, when it would have like actually ended the war and resulted in their victory. I don't understand it. If they were capable of, you know, amassing 1,500 horsemen in total secrecy, they were capable of gathering intelligence about the movements of the Spanish up the Spanish road into the Netherlands. They had intelligence of the Swiss Guard at the border of the Low Countries. They knew where the king was staying. They knew when he was basically unguarded. You know, they had all this access to intelligence and all of this, you know, the will to use deceptive strategies. Why didn't they do that early in the war when it would have been more decisive? You know, if it weren't the case that they wanted a war, they wanted this conflict to drag out.
And the Swiss retreat to the capital, closely followed by the Protestants. Since Condé and Coligny had time to prepare, they have the superior forces. But even this is not enough to besiege Paris, so Condé instead contents himself to blockade the city. However, Paris is well stocked with supplies, so the royalists stand firm. Soon, they gather more soldiers and go on the offensive. The two armies meet at Saint-Denis, just outside Paris, on the 10th of November 1567. Them is willing to engage, as memories of Dreux are still weighing heavy on their minds. With no battle on the horizon, dwindling funds and the country in ruins, reason inevitably prevails. The Peace of Longjumeau is negotiated in March. Frederick III, the Elector Palatine, is
Did they lose this battle?
Nationals. After a brief artillery duel, the Huguenot cavalry led by Coligny falls on the royalist left.
By the way, these guys were related. Montmorency, Coligny. These two commanders on opposite sides of the battlefield were like cousins.
Montmorency's troops are still disorganized, and the Parisian militiamen rout on first contact. Seeing this, Condé attacks the center. His ferocious charge breaks through the Catholic lines. Montmorency is mortally wounded and evacuated from the battlefield. But after this initial shock, the royalists rally. Both sides resume their initial positions, and by nightfall, the Protestants melt away. They retreat with high hopes, because they know that reinforcements are coming. Frederick III, the Elector Palatine, is a fervent believer in the Catholic conspiracy. With covert funds coming from England, he equips a large army of writers and lanzknechts to help the Huguenots. In December, his son, John Casimir, leads this army into France. The Catholic army is now nominally under the command of the king's...
John Casimir, let's look at that guy for a second. Is it him? No, this is too late. Look at that dude. Was it his father? That he looks like a very darkly featured man. But who? Which? John Casimir. There he is. Oh, so it is this guy. It is that guy. Interesting. known as the Lame. Here's his dad. And there's his dad. So this is his grandpa. Married to Elizabeth of Hesse. Nice little 6-pointed star on that. Anyway, interesting features on this German fella. Oh, he descends from Barbara Jagellon, or Jagellon, who Miles Mathis. Or it's Catherine. Gosh darn it. So Mathis, if you look into some of his older papers here, mentions Jagellon, daughter of Barbara Radziwill. And he shows a link between the Medicis and this family. He kind of makes a convoluted argument here that I'm not prepared to get into, but anyway, if you're interested in that, it's interesting to see this name come up. This would be the great-grandma of this John that came to help the Protestants.
His younger brother, Henry, Duke of Anjou, who is assisted by Tavannes, the governor of Burgundy. They try to catch up with Condé, but the Protestants slip away. In January 1568, Condé manages to join up with John Casimir. Now the royalists become disheartened and take up defensive positions while waiting for more reinforcements. Soon, immense forces gather on both sides, but none of them is willing to engage, as memories of Dreux are still weighing heavy on their minds.
Ooh.
With no battle on the horizon, dwindling funds, and the country in ruins, reason inevitably prevails. The Peace of Longjumeau is negotiated in March, ending the Second War of Religion. But Longjumeau is merely a reiteration of the previous peace, and thus doesn't solve anything. Lawlessness and violence only increase, and more Catholic and Protestant leagues are formed. Demobilization proceeds slowly, especially for the royalists.
So why would they drag this war out so much? I think the answer was just mentioned there with the Catholic and the Protestant leagues. they were gaining more and more popular support into this dichotomy, into this managed conflict. They wanted the average person to feel invested in feeling that the enemy is this other religious sect rather than the previous centuries where the common people saw the enemy as being just the nobility or the ruling elite in general. So to sort of bring them on board, to spread more ideas, to get people invested, to give the establishment an opportunity to influence the hearts and minds of the common people to a greater extent, they had to drag this conflict out as long as possible and get these people to join voluntarily these leagues and pick a side, basically.
After the Protestants complacently let all their soldiers go, the royalist side decides to retain a sizable force. Since Montmorency's death, the Guise, represented by the young Duke and the Cardinal of Lorraine, have gotten closer to power. They have no intention to let the Protestants off the hook. To this end, they preemptively occupy the Loire Valley, the main area of contention in the previous wars. They are encouraged in this by Spain, Philip II promising large reinforcements if the French finally decide to destroy heresy. Events are going well for Alba in the Low Countries, as he appears to have crushed the malcontents. In June 1568, the Counts of Egmont and Herne are executed. This news is received in France with consternation. With such high-ranking Calvinists on the chopping block, the French parallel, and Condé and Coligny find out that their lives are in danger, they flee to the Protestant stronghold of La Rochelle. Countless numbers of their co-religionists follow them, as La Rochelle becomes the new Huguenot capital.
Avoid these foods to lose weight fast.
Somebody said I need an ad blocker. I really do. This is insane.
The Royalists already have considerable forces in the field. They position one contingent to guard Orleans, and another further port. By autumn, a stalemate sets in, and the winter is spent with inactivity, as both sides are waiting for reinforcements. The Protestants in La Rochelle receive considerable help from English privateers. They also make a pact with the leaders of the Dutch Calvinists, the Prince of Orange and his brother Louis of Nassau. In December 1568, after a failed invasion of the Low Countries, Orange leads his army into the northeast of France, knowing full well that any Huguenot victory will strengthen his own side. Now the Catholics have to split their forces once more to block the Dutch rebels in Picardy. They are somewhat compensated by Spanish and German reinforcements that arrive early next year. While this was going on in the north, a different kind of fight was happening in the south. In this hilly country that was always prone to heresy, Huguenot guerrillas ruled the field. The so-called Army of the Viscounts is led by none other than the...
I like how he says that like this area was just prone to heresy. I made a tweet the other day basically giving my perspective on this where I said, you know, one of the axioms of ethno-nationalism is that culture is downstream from race or ethnicity. But that gets completely forgotten when it comes to Christianity and certain sects of Christianity, where, you know, I would argue that if you find an area that is quote unquote prone to Protestantism or prone to quote unquote heresy, then what you're looking at is essentially a certain ethnic group that is predominant in that region. What ethnic group corresponds to like hardcore Old Testament style Christianity? I would argue they would be crypto-Jews.
Count of Montgomery, the very man who mortally wounded Henry II. Montgomery maneuvers carefully with his ragtag army of volunteers, defeating the Catholic armies at every turn. By 1569, the Catholics in the south only hold parts of Provence and the cities of Bordeaux and Toulouse. Now the logical step is for Condé to sally from La Rochelle to unite with this southern army. The Protestants soon set out with a large force, aiming to avoid the Royalist army. But the Catholics successfully pursue them and catch up with the Huguenot rearguard at Jarnac on the 13th of March 1569. In a swift and bloody engagement, the Protestants are routed, and the Prince of Condé is captured when his horse falls. Moments later,
gotcha, bitch.
Later, he is shot execution style, no doubt in revenge for the assassination of the Duke of Guise. As a result, Coligny becomes the leader of the Protestants. In spite of the defeat at Jarnac, all is not lost. Coligny manages to escape with most of his army. Once in the south, he begins to reorganize his forces, encouraging them with the news of another German army that is gathering to relieve them. Indeed, by summer the Germans are once more ready to—
Look at that Zweibrücken guy. I want to look him up real quick too. Zweibrücken. Oh, we already saw him. That's the father of... Where is it? Yeah. The father of John. We already saw him.
To march. Wolfgang of Zweibrücken advances into France with lightning speed, capturing La Charité on the Loire. Zweibrücken dies shortly after, but his army manages to link up with the Huguenots. In sharp contrast to the Protestants, by this time the Catholic army is in a sorry state. Its soldiers are unpaid, famished and stricken by plague. Unable to stand in battle, they are content to shadow the Protestant army. But on June 25th, at La Roche-l'Abeille, an attempt to skirmish goes terribly wrong. Royalist musketeers are sent out without support and in a rainstorm. As their firearms are useless in the rain, they are massacred to the last man by charging Protestant cavalry.
Now, why would they put their men into that situation? I mean, what kind of commander would do that?
With this defeat, the royal army has no other recourse but to retreat to the Loire. Instead of pursuing them, Coligny decides to lay siege to Poitiers. But Poitiers is defended energetically by the young Duke of Guise.
Once again, why? Why not pursue the main leader?
Away from July to September. The Protestant...
July to September. So they sit there and they siege Poitiers for 3 months? Almost 2 months?
Army wastes away, and by autumn the royal army is ready to fight.
Once again, well, this pattern keeps reoccurring, where the Protestants allow the royals to regroup and to get ready to fight again.
Right. As they move to relieve Poitiers, Coligny is compelled to lift the siege. He tries to retreat south, but on October 3rd, 1569, the Catholic army catches up at Moncontour. Coligny tries to slip away, but a mutiny among his lanzknechts delays him for 2 hours. This gives enough time for the royalist army to deploy to block him. Now the Protestants are forced to give battle. The Catholic army is larger, with 8,000 cavalry and 15,000 infantry, made up of French, Swiss, German and Spanish contingents. The Protestants only have 6,000 cavalry and 12,000 infantry.
At my lowest, I was barely eating and overexercising while still gaining weight.
The battle starts with a
that ad. What a lie.
Cannonade that
I was barely eating and exercising, but still gaining weight. Isn't that what every fat girl says?
Targets mostly the...
Anyway, back to the topic at hand.
Infantry. The first move is made by the Catholic right, who fall on the Protestant left. In the vicious melee, Coligny has to divert reserves from his right flank. The Protestants manage to push the Catholics back, but in a fight with royalist righters, Coligny is wounded and forced to retreat. Anjou leads a cavalry charge against the Huguenot right. The attack nearly fails, but then the Catholics send in the reserve. The Protestant righters fall on the Swiss in an attack that is doomed to fail. As they withdraw, they leave the Protestant lanzknechts dangerously exposed. Seeing disaster unfold, Coligny orders a general retreat. The cavalry manages to disengage, but the infantry is trapped. The Swiss furiously attack the lanzknechts and massacre them nearly to the last man. For good measure, they also cut down much of the French infantry. The Protestant losses are enormous, with 8,000 killed or captured. The Catholics barely lose 1,000 men. Nonetheless, the Catholics fail to exploit this stunning victory. Coligny is allowed to flee south.
Oh, surprise, surprise.
Instead of pursuing them, the royal army engages itself in ruinous sieges around La Rochelle. But all this achieves is to degrade the Catholic army, while Coligny replenishes his forces in the south.
Who would have guessed? Who would have predicted that, based on the pattern that we've seen in this war so far? Oh my God, it's so tiresome.
The winter is spent with fruitless negotiations between Catherine of Medici and Jeanne d'Albret, the Queen of Navarre, who represents the House of Bourbon.
And now we've seen, what, like 3 instances of the Protestants letting the Catholics regroup, and now this is the second instance of the Catholics letting the Protestants regroup. So both sides are basically letting the other get away and regroup.
Till Henry of Navarre becomes a major. She asked Catherine for 4 security towns where the Protestants could maintain an armed force. For now, her request is refused, but as spring turns into summer, the balance of power is reversed. The king is utterly bankrupt and fails to field an army on time. In contrast, Coligny's forces have been replenished and are now joined by the army of the Viscounts. Coligny first tries to besiege Toulouse, but later changes his mind. He concludes that only by threatening Paris can he gain an advantageous peace. Therefore, he sets out to the east, and then pushes north along the Rhône Valley, pushing deep into Burgundy. Local forces are brushed aside, as Coligny's forces appear unstoppable. A royal army is hastily cobbled together, and faces the Protestants at Arnay-le-Duc on June 15, 1570. In spite of their numeric superiority, the Catholics fail to stop the Huguenot army. With the prospect of another blockade of Paris, Charles IX is persuaded to negotiate. By the Treaty of Saint-Germain, the previous liberties of the Protestants are confirmed, and additionally they get 4 security towns where they can be in charge and maintain an army. Thus, from now on, armed peace will become the norm. The Catholic conspiracy that was a myth before now turns into a reality. France's civil war has thus developed into a truly international European conflict.
It just developed into that? Seems like it's been that the whole damn time.
It's 1570. The conclusion of the last war brought neither peace nor reconciliation. The Protestants achieved a very advantageous settlement at Saint-Germain and are now triumphant.
Windhammer says this seems to be an internal struggle between the small hats. Yes, it's. I would say, you know, I wouldn't argue that it's completely fake or staged, but because obviously in battles like this, there's things that can't be predicted. There's things that can't be controlled. On both sides, people end up dying. Important people end up dying, but what I would argue is that, and what can be seen by the fact that, you know, family members, the same family has different members, brothers on either side, cousins on either side of the conflict. They keep on allowing each other to regroup. They keep on dragging out the conflict. In some way, it was managed on both sides. And even though there may have been actual disagreements or conflicts at the highest level in terms of how they should proceed, or, you know, just strategic differences or differences in overall political philosophy or outlook of what they think is best for the country as a whole, or what they think is best for their own rule, what kind of like political and religious philosophy they think is best for their rule. Despite those differences or arguments between these members of the elite, they still, I think, colluded at the highest level to drag this conflict out and to get something out of this conflict that both sides would benefit from.
The Guise are sidelined, and Catholics end up embittered towards the government. Violence and crime continue unabated as the
It's kind of like an internal family squabble, or like an internal caste squabble.
Armed peace of partisan leagues becomes the norm. The country is impoverished, hungry, and close to the boiling point. Catherine endeavours to solve these problems the only way she knows, by playing off one faction against the other. Catherine believes that Spanish intervention is the greatest danger to the kingdom. To counteract this influence of Spain and the Guise, she decides to enable the other side. To this end, she proposes 2 marriages. The Duke of Anjou is to marry Queen Elizabeth, and her daughter Margaret is to marry Henry Bourbon, the King of Navarre. This way, Catherine hopes to achieve a balance of power at home, and an English alliance to counter Spanish pressure abroad. In the end, the first proposal fails, as Elizabeth I refuses to commit. However, the marriage of Margaret and Navarre is given the go-ahead. While Catherine is busy securing the future of her dynasty, more radical solutions to the Spanish problem are being discussed. The Protestants led by Coligny reasoned that it would be a sin not to exploit Spain's troubles in the Low Countries. War would be the logical step, and immensely profitable. Coligny assures the king that if he promises religious tolerance, the Dutch Calvinists will throw open their gates and welcome him as a liberator. Serious steps are now taken to raise an army, before Catherine finds out and vetoes the plan. This proves to be a wise move, since on October 7, 1571, Philip II's fleet crushes the Ottomans at Lepanto. Spain has been waging an on and off war in the Mediterranean for decades. This victory proves decisive, meaning Philip can concentrate his attention on the Netherlands. Consequently, Charles IX backtracks and bans any and all intervention in the Low Countries. But the tables are turned early next year. On April 1st, 1572, Dutch privateers calling themselves the Sea Beggars capture the fortified city of Brielle. This way, the Dutch rebels gain a strategically important port, allowing them to extend their offensive. Soon the Spanish are on the back foot, as more and more towns and cities fall to the Protestants. In spite of the king's express orders not to intervene, Louis of Nassau, who stayed behind in France, decides to do precisely that. At the head of a small band of volunteers, he crosses into Flanders in early summer and captures a few towns. Coligny insists that the crown must exploit this golden opportunity to make his point convention. But then, in July 1572, one of these bands of volunteers runs into the Spanish army, who massacres them. The Genlis affair proves to be very embarrassing, implicating the king himself in a direct attack on Spain. The Spanish retort with stern threats of an all-out war if the trend continues. War is far from what Charles or Catherine wanted, but events quickly escalate beyond their control. Coligny doubles down and gives the king an ultimatum: war against Spain or civil war. The long-awaited wedding is held under these auspices on August the 18th, 1572. Paris is filled to the brim with persons of note from all over France. The Protestants come in large numbers, all dressed in black. Besides Navarre, Coligny and the young Prince of Condé are also
all dressed in black. All dressed in black.
So here. The Guise likewise come with a large retinue. Throughout the city, open calls to violence can already be heard, but nonetheless the wedding goes on without any major issues. 4 days of lavish celebration follow. Much to the displeasure of the Queen Mother, Coligny uses this time to pressure the king to take action against Spain. On August 22nd, while walking home from a meeting in the Louvre to his nearby quarters, Coligny is struck in the arm by a musket ball. The would-be assassin manages to get away, however it is established that he fired from a house owned by the Guise. The wounded Coligny demands an explanation. Charles and Catherine visit him and solemnly vow to find the culprits. An inquiry is opened the next day, however events take a different turn. In the evening it's decided to finish what was begun. the king, Catherine, and the Guise conspire to murder Coligny and the Protestant leaders. They reason that war is now inevitable. Armed groups of Protestants are gathered around Paris, waiting for a signal from Coligny to invade the city. By decapitating the leadership, they will gain the advantage in the coming war. To this end, a commando headed by the Duke of Guise and made up of his own bodyguards and Swiss mercenaries descends on Coligny's house.
Have you ever run a background check?
Oh, right at the good spot.
So crazy. What else?
Henry of Guise personally stabs the admiral.
Oh shit.
Coligny is beheaded and his body is thrown from the window to be desecrated.
Oh shit.
And paraded around the streets. Other Protestant leaders suffer the same fate, their lifeless bodies being displayed on the gibbet. Catherine and the Guise are satisfied, but the bloodshed continues. Taking a cue from their king, bands of Catholic soldiers and civilians go on the hunt for Protestants. Men, women, and children are killed without distinction. The Huguenots are easily identified by their distinctive black clothing.
Oh shit.
Checkpoints are set up to trap the ones who are trying
It was a Showa
to flee. During the following days, 3,000 Huguenots are killed in Paris. The king issues several decrees calling for calm, but in the end the authorities impotently stand by. Very few people manage to escape. Navarre and Condé are spared on the condition that they convert to Catholicism. The massacre in Paris is followed by several regional killings. Governors and local lords claim to execute the king's will when they order thousands of Protestants to be put to the sword.
Aerostar asks, weren't the Medici Italian Jews? Well, that's the speculation that I would go with. And if you throughout the entirety of this conflict, it seems like Catherine of Medici was the mediator between these, like sort of a puppet master between these two sides, keeping the conflict going. So, in a way, I mean, this so-called massacre almost, and you'll see after this, it reignites Protestant fervor. In a lot of places, it gives the Protestants an excuse to become even more militant and radicalized. So, in a way, I mean, as a Machiavellian, as Catherine of Medici has been described multiple times throughout this documentary, from a Machiavellian perspective. And from the perspective of creating chaos, creating division, this was a good move.
In spite of further calls to calm, massacres keep happening for months. What started as a coup against the troublesome Huguenot leadership turns into a genocide. For every Huguenot killed, 10 are forced to renounce their faith. Many flee abroad, never to return to France. Protestant communities in the north are greatly weakened. Those in the south fare somewhat better. The actual war starts in September 1572, when La Rochelle refuses to pay taxes. The king immediately starts to raise an army, but being penniless, this is easier said than done. The Swiss and even the Germans give Charles the cold shoulder. Without proper soldiers, the royalist offensive takes months to materialize. December and February are mostly spent.
B. What's Up says, could these wars be clashes between bloodlines, aka the priestly class and king's class mixed with J's and J influence for the Gentiles? That seems to be sort of the overall perspective I would take here is the priestly class or the priestly caste wants Protestant Reformation for the reasons that I stated at the earlier part of this stream. They want sort of a shift from the pure coercive power of feudal Europe into a more participatory, self-regulating, internalized discipline sort of state where the common people are molded in far more of a comprehensive way than ever before. whereas the caste, the kingly class, or the old aristocratic class, sees this as a challenge to their, ancestral right to rule. And so that seems to be like what was the main division that was being played on here.
Spent with marshalling supplies. A smaller army goes to besiege Saint-Germain, while Anjou heads to La Rochelle with the main force. The port city of La Rochelle is fortified with high curtain walls.
Damn, look at this production value. Do you think he created this model himself?
And medieval towers. However, during the wars, Italian-styled angled bastions had been erected at key points. The people of La Rochelle have every reason to fight. Some of them went all the way to Brazil to seek religious freedom. Being turned out from the French colony of France Antarctique, they came back only to be murdered by their own king. Surrender is out of the question now. Luckily for them, the slow mobilization of the Royal Army gave them ample
Rise.
English ships commanded by Montgomery regularly run the blockade. By the end of January, Anjou finally manages to close down the harbour. By April, a breach is made, and the Royalist trenches reach the moat of La Rochelle. 8 assaults are launched against the walls, all being repulsed by dogged resistance and enfilading fire from the neighbouring bastions. The Royal Army suffers horrendous casualties that are compounded by bad weather and disease. In May, the Protestants manage to sneak in a ship laden with gunpowder. The Catholics in turn are reinforced by 6,000 Swiss. The siege reaches its climax in June. Anjou throws everything against the breach, however the Protestants anticipate the attack and they are prepared. An inner wall had been erected just behind the breach, providing an ideal killing field for the Huguenot musketeers. This attack is also beaten back, and Anjou becomes exasperated. He is saved from embarrassment by a most unlikely event. Poland's ruling dynasty had just died out, and when forced to choose between 2 Habsburgs and a Valois, the Polish nobility picked the Frenchman. Having been chosen to be the king of an exotic country gives Anjou the perfect pretext to lift the siege. The Peace of La Rochelle, a very unfavourable one for the Protestants, is signed in June 1573, concluding the Fourth War. But peace is only achieved on paper. Lawlessness is at its highest level since the start of the conflict. Harsh taxes and famine lead to peasant revolts all over the country. Catholic and Huguenot lords are killed alike, the peasants blaming the upper classes for the continuation of the war. Meanwhile, in towns and cities, the various leagues gain ever more ground. It only takes a few months until...
See, that's what I was saying earlier, is that the dragging this conflict out and creating these Catholic versus Protestant leagues, that is how these peasant revolts could be channeled in a way that sort of diminishes the threat to the overall establishment, and it allows them to sort of shape the conflict in a way that, channels this dissent against, away from having them all be united against the ruling caste.
Till February 1574 for the war to resume. Huguenot insurgents seize several towns in the north, south and centre of the country. The king musters 3 small armies to deal with the guerrillas. The group in the north receives special attention, as this one is led by Montgomery. Eventually, Montgomery surrenders in the hope that he will be treated fairly. But when Catherine lays her hands on her husband's killer, Montgomery is beheaded without mercy. The other 2 expeditions make less progress. Each time they attack, the Protestants retreat to their fortified towns, leading to costly and protracted sieges. But war is only one of Charles's problems. The king is stricken with consumption, and his health deteriorates by the day.
Please, let me join your guild.
I'm going to be ending the stream pretty soon here, fellas. I just realized how late it is.
In this desperate state, he has to face a new political party, that of the malcontents. The malcontents are tired of the corrupt and sectarian ways of the older generation. One of their leaders is the Duke of Alençon, the king's youngest brother. Besides his liberal political views, Alençon is also motivated by dynastic ambition. Since his older brother Henry is occupied in Poland, he would like to be first in the line of succession to the French throne. As this would disproportionately favour the Protestants, Catherine makes sure that the crown goes to her favourite son, Henry. After Charles IX dies on May 30th, 1574, she immediately assumes governorship and places Alençon. Henry III leaves Poland in a haste and arrives to France early in 1575. Being a distant and irresponsible king, Henry proves to be even less popular than Charles had been. The south of the country is already in open rebellion, with the Huguenots setting up a state within a state. The region's governor, Henry of Montmorency d'Anville, and de Montmorency...
Damn, look at that guy's face. Henry de Montmorency d'Anville. Is that him? Look at that dude. Got a little cross-eyed action going on here. A little bit of that Jewish cross-eyed action. How can he be depicted as both wall-eyed and cross-eyed? Oh shit. Grandmaster of the Order of the Temple. What the hell was that? Oh, he's a Knights Templar. Interesting. So, you know, a predecessor of Freemasons. Interesting.
Montmorency's son is one of the malcontents. He rejects the new king and sides with the Protestants instead.
Oh, I could have predicted that.
Now Henry has no other choice but to turn to the Guise, who already act as proxies of Spain. His troubles intensify when Alençon and later Navarre escape from the court.
They escaped or were set free.
The two have thousands of followers who rally to their side.
See, this is what I mean by like Catherine of Medici playing to both sides, puppeting both sides. She arrests these two guys and then they just miraculously escape.
They who escaped earlier.
Like basically whatever seems to drag the conflict out farther is what Catherine of Medici is doing.
Is already in Germany recruiting an army. As the coalition's forces bear down on him, Henry III is only left in control of the area around Paris and the west of the country. Faced with impossible odds, the king is forced to sue for peace. The Edict of Beaulieu is signed in May 1576, concluding the Fifth War. This is the most advantageous peace so far for the Protestants. They can now pray anywhere except in Paris, and receive 8 security towns where they can maintain an armed force. An Espace General where Catholics and Protestants would be equally represented is also announced. But signing a peace is one thing, implementing it is an entirely different matter.
Alright fellas, this is a good place to stop. We're about 2/3 of the way through. We've got the first stream, we got about 1/3 of the way. Second stream, we did the second third, and we'll pick it up, let's see, today is Thursday. I'm thinking either tomorrow, possibly tomorrow, or Sunday. We'll pick this up again and finish this documentary. I don't know about you guys. I'm enjoying it. I know it might kind of be boring or drag on at certain points, but I've been enjoying this, and I'll probably prepare another like short monologue for the beginning of the next stream to just get some bigger ideas out there at the start, like I did for this one and the last one. Let me just come back on camera here. So yeah, I've been enjoying this. I hope you guys have been as well. And I will see you all on the next one. Thank you all for showing up and participating in the chat. It's always good to chat with you guys. So have a good night and see you at the next one. The next one, like I said, Aerostar, I can't promise because my life is so hectic, but either tomorrow night or Sunday night. So I'll announce it 5 minutes before I do the stream like I usually do. So if you follow me on Twitter, that's where I usually announce it. So thank you all and have a good night.